Just a little background context. Our project was conceived in 2019 when Lavina and I met on the Felician campus and realized we had much in common, including our dissertation committee members and a strong desire to improve our pedagogical practices. Lavina wanted to help her students become better learners, and I felt it best that to do this, we could focus on how to become better teachers ourselves. So we outlined a small project intending to look at our own pedagogical practices. Then, as we all experienced, the educational community was forced into an unplanned online learning experiment. As COVID hit, classes shifted from in-person to online, and we began to see changes in our students. A gap became apparent between those students who were becoming disconnected and those that remained engaged. As researchers, we wanted to find out how we could help our students overcome these challenges. So we looked at the factors influencing them, including students' perceptions of their intersectional identities. We observed each other teach multiple times and how we each interacted with our students. We would meet and debrief and provide positive feedback, asking probing questions to one another. The salient features of this study revealed that there is a dynamic nature to the multifaceted identities of both teachers and students, and these emerge differently in the virtual classroom space. Second, the shift to virtual instruction exacerbated students' inequalities and actually amplified their differences. While I will put the link to our published article in the chat box, more importantly, we recognized that at the heart of this research is not just a paper, a publication, but rather it's an opportunity to work towards social justice more collaboratively. So Lavina and I began working with our colleagues here today who are presenting with us. As we talk about these issues, we wanted to take a harder look at the Felician culture and address the needs for our students to be more aware of social justice issues. So, what have we done, or what are we doing? One of the things that we really wanted to focus our energy on was the question. It really guides this work, the work of all 6 of us now. And that question is, in what ways can we better assess and then address social justice and cultural diversity issues, both in the School of Education, but also across our university at Felician? This is a very exciting time to be doing this work. Dr. McGowan in the School of Education was recently approved to be one of the first universities in New Jersey to engage in the accreditation process with the Association for Advancing Quality in Educator Preparation. AQEP has rigorous standards around social justice. One of the hallmarks of the AQEP standards is their emphasis on culturally responsive practice, including intersectionality in terms of race, ethnicity, class, gender identity and expression, sexual identity, and the impact of language acquisition and literacy development on learning. At Felician in the School of Education, we are taking an honest look at this, and we are committed to making the necessary changes to be more supportive and responsive to our students of color. This entails developing new curriculum and embracing assessment standards that are harder hitting. So that will ensure the practices so that our graduates are effective at engaging in culturally responsive educational practices with diverse learners. This also means securing partnerships and hosting field experiences in diverse cultural and socioeconomic community contexts. First, we're taking a step to adopt the Teaching for Tolerance anti-bias framework standards. These are a set of anchor standards with age-appropriate learning outcomes divided into 4 domains: identity, diversity, justice, and action. I could tell you more about these standards, but I'll save that. They basically grew out of the project of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And these standards, these anchor standards, are age appropriate and actionable for teachers. So moving ahead, basically, I'd like to really just focus on the one area of curriculum that I've been developing, and that is tied in with culturally sustaining pedagogies. This is, and if you look at the slide a few slides back, there's, the key phases over the last 30 years. About 30 years ago, we used to have multicultural education. This is not the course of our parents, just like the shampoo. It's not my mother's shampoo. This is not our mother's multicultural ed class. That was a great start, right? But then we moved into social justice. And now we've kind of landed in the more updated version of this, which is culturally responsive education. The purpose of culturally sustaining pedagogies is to offer preparation and practicing educators a chance to engage in sustaining a focus on the strengths and the wisdom of young people, families, elders, communities, and educators. And this is pre-K through college classrooms across all content areas, in community organizations, in peer and family settings, as a tool of positive social transformation and revitalization. This mirrors the Felician way. This is part of our values: transformation, solidarity with the poor. So it really aligns quite nicely. These are the two texts I'm looking at. We don't have a course number yet, but you can see between Lotz and Billings, Hammond, I love the culturally responsive teacher and the brain. I'm looking forward to this class. And of course, Django Paris. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lavina. She is obviously not just my partner in crime, but she is also the person who is doing the course development, not just for the School of Education course the teachers will take that I just focused on, but she's doing an introductory course to social justice for all students at Felician.
Thank you, Charity. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Introduction to Social Justice course. Just to step back a little bit, students learn ideas about social justice very early, especially at school. Some pick up concepts that help them better understand how a fair and just world works. Others may learn ideas that can hinder gender, racial, and social equalities. We just have to take a look at our society today to see the issues that are present in society. So what can we do? As teachers, we can guide our students as they learn about social justice by weaving social justice into both classroom discussions and into our course curriculum. So social justice has become a larger issue in recent years, including topics about social justice in the workplace. A generation has grown up, as you all know, with instant access to information about any culture, both current and present. So global communication allows students to kind of speak about old political borders. Incidents of economic and social disparity are easier than ever, again, to spot as teachers in our virtual environment today. Our classrooms, however, remain one of the the chief places, I believe, that students can air and hear new ideas. So we want to create a safe space for our students to have the chance to understand the diverse nature of our world and their place in it. Our Felician University will offer students coursework, as you will see today, that will emphasize social justice and the role that education plays in a democratic, pluralistic, and complex society. So we vision the Introduction to Social Justice course to be a gen ed course that all students will be invited to take in either their freshman or sophomore year. It will be broad in scope and will aim to attract students across all 4 schools at Felician. The Introduction to Social Justice course will examine power and privilege in diverse populations. In this course, students will explore contemporary and historical examples of oppression. Students will examine their own prejudices and biases. We will offer classes on critical issues that involve students across all abilities. It will give students the chance to analyze various research topics in education. So all this we focus from 4 lenses. One is from a multicultural lens. As Charity mentioned, it is not the multiculturalism as of old, a diversity lens, experiential learning, because students need to be able to apply what they've learned to the outside world, and of course, from the lens of sustainability. Next slide, please. So here are the 3 goals we vision for our introduction course, the Introduction to Social Justice. We hope that it will be run as a humanities course or a sociology course at a level 200. And again, like I mentioned, learning about social justice prepares students to be well informed about their realities. And as teachers, we can help them tackle real world problems by helping them critically evaluate issues from multiple viewpoints. And it is a concept that I think we can infuse in every academic subject as we move ahead. So over time, students will be able to learn, view current and historical events and understand how their actions can affect the future through the lens of social justice. They will be able to spot discrimination and inequalities. And I think this is extremely important for them to make better decisions making. And with this in mind, some of the goals we vision for our class is, what is the life and dignity of a person? What does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to have personhood? So that's one of the first goals. The second goal is the call to civic duty. So now that we understand what social justice is about, or we are beginning to understand what social justice is about, what then becomes our civic duty towards a democratic, pluralistic society? Number 3, what are some of our rights and responsibilities? What are some of the privileges we have in society? Oftentimes, I think our wants and needs are always mixed up, and so with our rights and responsibilities. And so I think we need to be able to distinguish between the two, and be discriminating through a critical lens. The fourth is solidarity with the poor. It's not just enough to live in our own little bubble, but we need to look beyond us. We need to, see the situation around us in our communities, in our nation, globally. In what way can we help those who are poor and vulnerable? What does it mean to have dignity of work? Oftentimes, there are certain jobs that are looked down upon, but that shouldn't be. What does it mean to have dignity as a worker? And then the last goal is, how do we care for creation? I think this is also very important. It's one thing that we can understand social justice, but it's through the lens of inequalities, but it's another to understand it from the lens of environment. How can we care for our planet? How can we leave our planet a better place for our children? So these are some of the major goals that we vision for our introduction to social justice course. Next slide, please. And so here are some of the topics that it's not an exhaustive list, but and it is modified, as we move. We are still in the construction phase, so it will continue to be modified. So some of the issues that we will discuss is, one is healthcare. I think coronavirus has brought and shed a spotlight on the disparities that are present in our population, minority population. So that's something that we need to understand. The second is immigration. We just have to look at our borders and see the problems that are happening at our borders. The refugee crisis. What constitutes a refugee? What constitutes an immigrant? I know that we understand it in the broad sense of the term, but what does it mean to help somebody who's fleeing their country because of atrocities and they have no other choice? So how do we understand that? Income gap. I think that is another big one. People have various advantages and disadvantages because of income. So that's one of the things that we'll be looking at. Gun violence, I think this is terrible. In the past few days, we've seen incidents of gun violence again. And I think our schools need to be a safe space. Students come into the classrooms to learn, and that's what they should do. They should be learning. And gun violence, that is an additional layer of uncertainty that is present in our society today. And so how do we engage in the conversation of gun control and gun violence? Hunger and food security. Again, the pandemic, recent pandemic and ongoing pandemic has shone a spotlight on food insecurities, people who are unable to work and people who are unable to get food in ways that they actually used to get food. For example, in schools, they have the free and reduced lunch, but if they're not going to go to school, how are they going to get the food? So that's another topic that we're going to be discussing. Equality and racial injustice and equity. I think those two topics go hand in hand. Again, we've seen instances of minorities being discriminated against for various different reasons. So how do we understand why and how can we help? And of course, the last is, in a very broad way, human rights. What do we understand in terms of a fellow human being across the world, across the globe, in another country, in another city? What do we mean by that? And so these are not, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the topics that we plan to tackle in an introductory course. So to summarize, the introduction to social justice, again, like I said, will examine issues of power and privilege in diverse populations. Students will be able to explore contemporary and historical examples of oppression. Students will also examine, another very important key point here is to examine their own prejudices and biases. And of course, this is all going to be done in a very safe space, so that students have the capability to analyze various research topics and help them in their future courses of study.
Thank you so much, Lavina. I just love the focus, and I love the idea of having all students at Felician take this introductory course. It's so important because to move into a course in education that's specific to teachers about asset-based pedagogical approaches, one of the key other topics that I feel like then scaffolds nicely on this intro course in the course I'm developing, How to Develop and Enact Culturally Sustaining Pedagogy, is this timely issue in education, since New Jersey is among just 5 states in the country who are beginning the requirement of inclusion of LGBTQ issues in the curriculum, including the impact of homophobia, transphobia, gender oppression in schools, as well as the historical and systematic oppression of LGBTQ individuals. And that's a critical topic. And I love that AQEP, with their focus on standards that relate to social justice, really do care about these and seeing these assessed, and not just in courses. So while we've covered the curricular aspects here, and the assessment standards that we're striving towards, we're now going to shift our focus a little bit away from curriculum, and we're going to look at very specifically some of the retention efforts and what the data says. So I'm not sure if we can see Dr. Towler. I know she's on, but I'm not sure if we could see or hear her. Dr. Towler, are you able to talk to the group? I think she might be in as a viewer, a participant, but not a presenter. So Dr. Towler, we're going to do our best to highlight your slides. This is a real loss because I feel like Dr. Towler is so engaging and she's such a critical part of this collaborative team. So unless there's a tech person that can help her kind of pivot between the roles in the presentation, I'm going to get started. And if Dr. Towler, you're able to jump in, I know Dr. McGowan will help me talk about retention. And we know that research shows, right, that the dropout rate tends to be highest amongst first-generation students and low-income students. And at Felician, just having completed Title II work, I can tell you that over 50% of our teacher education population is from underrepresented groups. Over 50% of our students university-wide are first-generation college students. And then 24% of those students are second-generation college students. So this is the context in which we work every day. It's something we're very proud of. But there are challenges there around retention. And so one of the things that we're really looking at, and you can see the study that's highlighted on the slide, I won't read it to you, there's a lot that we can do. And when you look at 93% of colleges and university presidents are either somewhat or very concerned about the disproportion here, the impact on students from underrepresented groups, I know that there is plenty of work ahead of us. And one of the things that we really want to take a closer look at is what about our retention support strategies are working?
So Dr. Dacey,
go ahead.
Forgive me for interrupting. I'm so sorry. I wanted to share, particularly to the work of Dr. Towler, why these slides were so significant to her to include and how germane it was to this conversation today. I think both you and Dr. Sequeira did a beautiful job of really talking about the granular, on-the-ground course development construct of how do we bring these issues to our students, how we build their awareness, and more importantly, how do we make them good stewards of this mission work out as they go into society, into their careers, and particularly, of course, in teacher education. But Dr. Towler has been germane and instrumental at the university level. And so I almost feel like we're kind of doing a backward funnel approach in our presentation today. And I have no doubt right now she is nodding her head. And I hope that I'm doing this justice, Dr. Towler, to your incredible work. Sharon was among several colleagues who were tapped by the university administration to work specifically with students who were struggling with success, right? And if you look at this slide that Sharon had put together, it was less about who do we identify, but more importantly, how do students self-identify? Once they do that, in combination with the university identifying students who needed additional retention support, why is this a critical issue? And more importantly, is there equity in how this is being addressed systemically across the university? And interestingly enough, the work that these retention specialists, who, by the way, are all faculty at the university, who are identified by the Vice President for Academic Affairs, the work that they were charged to do was to really engage with our current students who are across all of our different schools at Felician, talk to them about their individualized experiences, and really garner from them a better way for us to define what we mean by student success. And the goal, of course, if you notice, one of the boxes in this slide says better outcomes. Those of us who are assessment geeks, I put myself in that category of being one. You can't expect a different outcome if you keep doing something exactly the same way. And so, so much of the work that Dr. Towler and her colleagues and Dr. Gray and like I said, our Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. McGeary, have really been focused on is, one, how do we know their lived experiences? What are we doing with that information? How should it guide our work in advisement, in developing retention support services. And how do we get ahead of this? So we're not being reactive, but we're being proactive. And to me, this is really where we start to see why having courses and curriculum that support this in the infrastructure of an institution is essential. How fortunate are we to be at Felician right now, where our core values, which I think Dr. Sequeira beautifully articulated and dovetailed, we are at a place where this is who we are. We are called to serve this population. So there's a difference between being called to serve them and actually knowing what needs to be served. Dr. Dacey, does that sound about right?
Not only does it sound accurate, but I feel like it's inspiring us campus-wide. And we're seeing pockets of efforts and energy spent. But a lot of this work comes down to the daily outreach to students. How are you? Emails, come on in for advisement. So that advising and academic coaching, we're getting creative. It can't just be starfish. It can't just be emails. It's got to be text. It's got to be, virtually, we're all kind of trying to be creative. Another
I
thing
also think, I was just going to say, one of the hallmarks, and I know Dr. Towler speaks about this. Dr. Towler is also the Director of Educational Leadership at Felician in the School of Ed. And I know in her preparation of school leaders, she talks about this extensively, but it's on here about really knowing who your students are. And I as the academic leader for the School of Education and a part of the executive leadership for the university, I think it's really important for all of us as a professional community, certainly everybody who's participating today, when we say, how does this relate to assessment? Understanding that first generation college students may have different needs to be successful is paramount in developing meaningful assessments that really demonstrate opportunities for success, right? And so the advising and the academic coaching, the Dare, Dream, Do program, our first year mentoring programs, right? Getting to know who our students are before they actually step on campus as a first year freshman. And more importantly, the coaching aspect, Dr. Dacey, that you mentioned, understanding that our students may not know the questions to ask. It may not be in their inclination to seek assistance. So why not model, right? And as teacher educators, do we not do that all the time? Why not model for these young people what and how they want to conduct themselves so that they start practicing this model of success, right? Control of their decision making, knowing how to ask for assistance in a meaningful, purposeful way, and most importantly, knowing the resources that are available to all students to be successful. Dr. Dacey?
So the final element of this before we transition into Dr. McGowan's section is really the social aspects. And that's been tough during COVID, right? So our NIH grant, our Saint Scholars, they're all from underrepresented groups in STEM. And they let us know in their feedback, as the educational researcher, I'm always checking in with them, surveying, and they said, we just need to be engaged more online. So we've been doing things even as simple as online bingo, getting people together, because there's a limited amount of opportunity that we have to engage, and people are zoomed out. We all are in the same place. So we look forward to the summer. We look forward to the fall where we'll all be back on campus again. And that's going to be critical. One of the social connections and being involved, on campus directly translates into not just academic, but social, emotional health and well-being, the friendships that we build. So now we're going to shift a bit, and we are going to have Dr. McGowan tell us a little bit more specifically about some of the work university-wide as well at the leadership level.
Thank you, Dr. Dacey. So as I had just mentioned, when talking about the work that Dr. Towler was doing, this is really kind of like an inverted funnel, right? So we started with the granular, what we were doing to assist our students, and as we're planning for the curricular development to support this cultural responsiveness. And then obviously the great work that Dr. Towler and her colleagues regarding the retention level part of this. How does this start to implicate assessment? I am honored, quite frankly, to share a process that has been ongoing now since October at Felician. This fall, we welcomed our interim president, Jim Crawford III. He is the first African-American male president at Felician University. Why is this so significant in this moment, in this time, and germane to this conversation? When we're talking about commitment to representing all populations and to ensuring voice, it's also about having role models that our students see, gravitate toward, feel valued, and want to emulate. And when President Crawford was joining Felician, the Board of Trustees established a transition committee, which was comprised of faculty, staff, alumni, administrators, students. And this transition committee was given a charge. And the charge was, who do we know and what do we know? And so as you can see in this slide that's shared with you today, there were 5 main constituencies. The Felician Sisters, which are the hallmark of our institution and the mission-driven nature of our institution, our faculty, our staff, our students, and our alumni. Dr. Blanchard, who is an esteemed colleague of mine and Associate Dean handling assessment for the university, he and I conducted both a survey and then very strategic focus groups on this very similar topic of what we're discussing today, and getting to the question of who are we, who do we want to be, and how do we get there? And outside of garnering, now see how this connects to assessment, right? Notice in that inverted cone that I'm referencing, we're talking about data, not making decisions in a vacuum, but making decisions that are responsive to the culture and who we are as an institution, unique to Felician. And I would challenge and really encourage my colleagues who are watching this today to think deeply about how important and how significant this is in an assessment model of closing that assessment loop of not just knowing what you want to work on, but having a strategic plan and identity about how to get there. For us, we used our 5 strategic groups. We are now developing faculty development under the guidance of our Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Sylvia McGeary, in tandem with the charge of President Crawford. We are using our constituencies to really use them as a backdrop to look at where we think the right direction is to go, and to have a barometer, an on-the-ground barometer, to really get to the heart of who are we and how can we be the best Felician we know that reflects our students, right? It all comes back to how do we create the best student experience? How do we support them the best so that they will not just start an educational career, but finish one, and most importantly, be able to take those talents and move them on into professional careers after their graduation. The presidential transition team is still ongoing. Our work is now with the University Senate, and one of our esteemed parts of our transition committee has been our alumni. And how excited am I, Dr. Dacey, in this moment to have Kevin Cataldo, who is one of our Felician University graduates. He is a teacher in the Newark public school system. And I'm just going to take a moment of bragging to say he has just been accepted to a doctoral program. And Kevin, to me, exemplifies why we at Felician, not only are we committed to this work, we should be committed to this work. And I know that Kevin will continue to be an ambassador for the Felician way beyond any words I can give him. So I'm turning it over to you.
Dr. Dacey. Dr. McGowan. Dr. Dacey, next slide, please, because of time. Perfect. So when I was invited to join this presentation, I had met with Dr. Dacey about 3 weeks ago, and I was asked to reflect on two key questions that came, I think, in the perfect time. So the very first question was, how well does Felician prepare its teacher candidates to address the needs of students from underrepresented groups or to teach in urban school districts? So two key points came up to me. One is the fact that Felician has very clinically rich programs, and the fact that I was able to get into the classroom the very second semester of my teacher education career. And the second key point is that it emphasizes a lot on being reflective educators. I think that if we don't teach our teacher candidates to be reflective, then they're going to have a hard time once they're officially teachers in the classroom, because as we know, teaching, revolves a lot of reflection and thinking and to being very flexible, especially now with COVID and how we were able to, transition from being in person to fully remote and now hybrid. I think part of that, being very reflective and clinically rich is very, very important. Even though those two aspects were great during my experience at the time, I think there's always room for improvement with anything in life. And with the work that's being done now with Felician in terms of heading more towards social justice education courses and culture responsive education courses, that was one of the concerns I had. And it seems like it's heading to that path where Felician is addressing that situation. So the first suggestion that I had is to offer and embed more social justice and culture responsive courses. Especially now, as we deal with this pandemic, realize how the inequities and inequalities in our education system truly exist. And the second one is, how can Felician better support its graduates, right? They do a great job preparing them to become teachers, but hey, how do we invite them to come back, reflect, and say, hey, come back home, come share your struggles with us, what's working, what's not working, how can we improve our programs? So that's when we lead into we're trying to set up a School of Education induction support group. And this is still in the works. Dr. Dacey and I are still, figuring things out, and hopefully we're going to be implementing this as soon as possible. But the goal is for teachers who are in their first year or fourth year in their teaching career. And the goal is to meet once a month. And now with COVID, we can easily do that virtually. And it's to share successes, struggles, and resources. There's so many resources out there that I, as an educator, am not aware of, right? So if I'm meeting with my fellow graduates who graduated in the same year as I did or before me, we can share resources like what's working, what's not. And a very important part for me as a novice urban educator, as a novice culture responsive educator, is to share resources around social justice and culture responsive teaching. How can I improve my practice? How can I better serve my students, especially today with the very social unrest that we see in this country with COVID? How can we better improve my practice as an educator? How can I make my education for my students more meaningful to their lived experiences, something that I did not have when I went to school? So it's something that I'm very, very big on, and I'm proud to say that Felician's heading to that path. And I as soon to be a doctoral student, I hope to work more with Felician on how we can better improve the programs and hopefully one day join my colleagues and officially become a colleague as a teacher educator. If there's any questions, feel free to type in the chat box or ask during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I have to say it was a pleasure to visit your class for Read Across America this year. And I'm so happy that you're going into the same doctoral program I graduated from. I know you're going to take a class on culturally responsive teaching with Ana Maria Villegas, who we all know is an expert in the field. So as we wrap up, I really turn it back to Dr. Henning. I just think that one of the things that Kevin said that I really just want to end on to wrap up is this importance today, now more than ever, that we as teacher educators are instilling our graduates with this recognition that teaching is a political and an ethical activity. This is about not, disrupting the inequitable structures and really focusing on the larger struggle of social justice, because we're all in this together. And that's something that's required collaboration amongst this group, but it's going to go larger than Felician. This has to be a statewide activity. I know there's a lot of initiatives. John, you could probably speak more to that, how we've come together at the statewide level. But I just want to say thank you to everybody. I want to say thank you to all of our presenters, and especially Dr. Towler. I know you're watching us, and we wish we could have heard you. We miss you.
Thank you, Charity. Hey, great presentation, team. Very nicely done. There was a question in the chat box that turned up earlier. Have you considered using the critical practices for anti-bias education developed by the same group as the social justice standards? That's from Kate Spence.
I would love to find out more. Does that mean they're related to teaching for tolerance? That same framework, or are they different?
Kate, if you'd like to type in a follow-up, or, I have another question while
Sure.
we're thinking about that. Could you, they're developed by teaching.
Oh, fabulous. Yes, we are using the anti-bias framework. That's the they have like 4 letters, but IDJA stands for identity, diversity, justice, and action. That may be one and the same. Thank you. Any resources you have, please send my way.
I had a question too. Could you talk a little bit more about the relationship between AQUEP accreditation, and how that either motivated this or this fit into what AQUEP was? What was the relationship?
I think Dr. Henning, I'm going to allow Charity to dig a little deeper on this, but let's just say that we were already having the conversation. This was something, both Charity and Lavina had already been doing their research on this. This was something that was already a groundswell conversation at our institution. And it led to the discussion of, should we be pursuing AQUEP, because we felt that the value that was given specific to social justice and cultural responsiveness was a paramount feature of the work. And so if this was something as an institution that we felt was becoming a hallmark, or a more prominent hallmark, then why should our assessment of the work that we do as a school be separate or different because of accreditation? Accreditation should mirror and support the work that we value at our institution. And so specific to how, and Dr. Dacey, if I'm incorrect on this, I know that this was absolutely the foundational discussion that was had at the executive administration level about making the decision to go forward with AQUEP.
And not only that, building upon what you're saying, there's something so powerful about Marilyn Cochran Smith's keynote at the AQUEP symposium this year that every one of our faculty attended. We were all listening together, and we were blown away by her focus on how accreditation needs to be stronger in this area. That, making our accreditors happy is not why we do this work. Doing the right thing for the right reasons means that we want to better assess ourselves in the area of how we plan for and enact and support instruction and assessment that's differentiated and culturally responsive. So that's the piece where the standards for AQUEP, I love that they're simpler, they're more straightforward, and it's all about working in various communities, cultural contexts, with diverse learners. They are all about it. And it's nice to see the arrows line up for an accreditor. And they just feel like a kinder, more gentle, like more personable accrediting group that's about these same issues that we care about. So that really was a big draw.
Well, and especially particular to this topic, right? This, like I said, specific to Dr. Henning's question, It's kind of like the chicken and the egg conversation, which came first. I think they happen simultaneously. But I do think that as an instructional leader, and Dr. Henning, you certainly can appreciate this being the dean at Monmouth, as deans, we are charged with really having that moral, ethical compass for our institution. What is important to our institution? Who do we represent, right? We're not operating in an ivory tower in our own lane. We should be building responsive programming that not only enhances the experience of our students, but increases their value to the communities they're going to serve upon graduation, and to make them life changers, right? In education, teacher ed, ed leadership, all of those tertiary areas, we are building life changers to the next generation of learners. And so I think that to find something that valued this lane as much as we value this, and as closely aligned as it is to our core values at Felician University, made this a decision that I think was both prudent and inevitable. Great
answer. I note that Kate put a link in the chat box for those who are interested. I believe we're out of time. We had time, and I don't see any more questions, so it might be a good time to say thank you to the presenters for sharing your work and your passion for your work. We deeply appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Henning. Thank you, everybody, and great work to NJACTE for today, for this opportunity for professional growth and learning. Thank you so much.
And to Amy and Ashley for putting together such a great conference. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.